Sunday school class. We so appreciate that, and thank you for coming for all those who are with us online. Today we're looking to actually, this is wrong, we're going to review Daniel 6 and continue in Daniel 6. And the objective is simply to understand and know God's power to save. So we're in Daniel chapter 6. We've covered really verses 1 through 13 last week. We're going to be looking to finish up the chapter this week. Who can just remind us and refresh our memories where we have been in Daniel chapter 6 verses 1 through 13? What are some things that have happened? Where have we been?
Daniel didn't obey the decrees with not pray to the king.
Yeah, excellent.
And they wanted him to pray to the king.
Great. So remember that the kingdom has transferred from Babylon to Persia. The new Persian king, Darius, who is Cyrus, made a decree at the council of whom? Who gave him this counsel to make this decree? Okay, basically his satraps and his two high officials, because they were jealous of Daniel. And so it's his counselors, not necessarily Darius that's against Daniel. It's his counselors, it's his overseers, it's of his officials that are against Daniel. And so this decree is made. Nobody should be praying to any god except King Darius for 30 days or so, I believe it says in verse 7. And what we went over last week was that Daniel, immediately upon knowing that the document had been signed, goes up into his attic area, goes up into his second room upstairs, and immediately opens the window, begins to pray. Okay, we had some interesting comments from commentaries on that last week. If you missed it, you can check it out on YouTube. It's up there. So now he's in this position of going to be thrown into the lion's den. The officials have basically trapped. They've gone and told the king. We're going to step right into the middle of the story, right into the king's response here. Can somebody please read for us Daniel chapter 6, verses 14 through 18. Daniel chapter 6, verses 14 through 18 for us, please.
When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. Then the men went as a group to King Darius and said to him, "Remember, your majesty, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed." So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel and threw him into the den of lions. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den. The king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation may not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep.
Excellent. Thank you so very much. So what do we see here in this section, verses 14 through 18, which is primarily focused on King Darius and his response to what is now happening?
You think he realized the goof he made?
Yeah, okay. Does he realize the goof he made? Probably. He seems to have favored Daniel, and by his reaction, he really wants to have Daniel saved. Verse 14, when he heard these words, he was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. Right? How is this going to happen? How is this going to take place? Can I get him out of this? And at the end, what happens to the king? Well, sorry, too far at the end. Let's back up a little bit to the middle, I guess. In verse 15, the king is trapped. Right? There's nothing he can do. He's got to fulfill the law. Daniel's going to go into the lion's den. Okay? In fulfillment of the law. What other insights do you see here, and especially focusing in first on verses 14 and 15? What other insights do you see here?
The king had a lot of respect for him, it sounds like.
Yeah, it seems like Darius has a lot of respect for Daniel. Right? That's probably accurate. Yep. If he labors at it until sundown to try to save him, that's pretty significant. What's one of the reasons why he labors till sundown, and then at sundown it's the case that the people say, well, you got to throw Daniel to the lions? Why don't they do that right away? It's just something interesting. Lions can hunt during the day, but usually they hunt at night. Okay, so you're putting what's happening here is they're going to put Daniel down at feeding time. Okay, that's what's happening. They're putting him down at feeding time. Okay.
The lions are probably partially starved anyhow.
Oh yes, indeed. The lions are probably partially starved anyhow. I mean, they're there for a specific purpose. Okay. Absolutely. Anything else that we see here? Let's go in through verse 16 through 18 then. What do we see?
Well, the king knew that throwing Daniel into the lion's den meant great torture even before they killed him.
Absolutely. The king is aware of how severe this punishment is. Go ahead.
And then the king says he hopes to God, so he had to.
Yeah. Notice here it's very interesting. The king declares to Daniel, or even blesses Daniel, may your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you. Or in the NIV, I'm guessing it was the God whom you serve, deliver you continually. Probably a little ambiguity there in the translation. More or less, it's the same either way. So that's the idea. Very good. So the king declares, the king blesses Daniel.
He probably would have heard about the three thrown into the fire. And so from that he would think, well, maybe your God
Yeah.
will save you.
Darius may have heard about some of the stories of the past, right, in Babylon, including the time of the furnace. And, hey, your God is powerful enough. May he deliver you. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. What's ultimately, just thinking about this a little bit more abstractly and at a little bit of a higher level, just overarching events, what's fascinating about what we've seen so far? This is really abstract, so let me just give it to us. The king, who is the highest power in the land, is unable to save Daniel. The king who is the highest power in the land, unable to save Daniel. Okay? So the king is going to be learning, and everybody's going to be learning a lesson. And the question is that here, is there someone higher than the king who has the power to save? Okay, is there someone higher than the king who has power to save? Remember that we're in Gentile territory here. We are in Babylon, in the midst of the Persian Empire, with foreign deities, and they've never seen anything like it other than stuff that's happening in the book of Daniel. So that's their question, especially for Darius. Is there someone higher than he who can save? Alrighty. Verse 17 and 18. What happens here in verses 17 and 18?
The mouth of the den was sealed with the seal of the king.
Yeah, the mouth of the den is sealed with the seal of the king. Okay? Most likely, this probably means that it was coated in wax. so that the seal wouldn't be broken. And then they put their rings all around it as the wax was hardening, so to make sure that it was sealed. No human being was going to step into this without them knowing. Right? No human being would be stepping into this without them knowing. Okay? If the seal had been broken and some human being had saved them, then they would be able to tell, because all of the rings stamped into it wouldn't be there if they tried to reseal the wax or something like that. All right, so this is an official seal. And it decrees, and specifically in verse 17, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. What happens in verse 18? What does Darius do in 18?
Was fasting.
He's fasting. You got it. What else?
No entertainment,
No entertainment.
and he couldn't sleep.
And he couldn't sleep. You got it. So those are the three things. For me, this is almost like indicative of him being in prayer. You know, fasting is usually a sign of mourning or a sign of praying, something like that. Without entertainment, right? He's depriving himself of the things of the flesh. He's foregoing that. And sleep is fleeing him. So what else is he going to be doing? Right, he's probably worrying all night, and maybe that's a sign of him praying. Maybe. Now, the text doesn't say that explicitly, so we can't say anything other than a maybe. But he's up. Yep.
Well, Darius must have known something of Daniel's history to have this kind of feeling for him.
Yeah.
He certainly wouldn't pace the floor like this for just anybody.
Yeah. He may have known something about his history. He definitely values him, right? Because he wouldn't be pacing the floor all night for somebody he didn't value and respect. Absolutely.
So Daniel must have, other nations must have learned of Daniel's work in Nebuchadnezzar's government previous, because he was a overseer on that kingdom as well.
Sure. Yes. Daniel knew a lot of the governmental aspects, I think you're saying, in Babylon, and was probably an extraordinarily useful official for that reason. Yep. Yep. All right. So the tension is actually mounting here as the story is read. We're not feeling the tension because we already know the end. But if you're hearing this story for the first time, this is when the tension's mounting. The author doesn't go to Daniel's experience. It's on Darius, who's actually really in a safe place. He's in his palace. Oh yeah, he can't sleep and he's fasting and he doesn't have his entertainment. Poor king, right? But he's in a safe place. He's in a platter of worry. But the narration here is focused on him. And so then we're questioning, well, what's Daniel going through? Is Daniel sleepless, or is he asleep? Is he like Jonah and Jesus, sleeping in the boat when the storm's going? Or is he awake too? Just kind of waiting or praying? What do you think?
He used a lion for a pillow.
What's that?
He used a lion for a pillow.
Yeah, he used a lion for a pillow. It could very well be, right? Using a lion for a pillow. Sure. Okay. So we don't know. The narration doesn't tell us. We can just use our imaginations there to fill in the blank. Verse 19, we step back into the narrative again with the king. It's focused again on the king. So can I have one person please read for us Daniel chapter 6, verses 19 through 24.
Then the king arose very early in the morning, and went in haste to the den of the lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then David said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Then the king was exceedingly glad for him,
and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God.
Excellent, thank you. Would you do one more verse for me, to verse 24?
And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions. Them, their children, and their wives. And the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den.
All right. Very good. So let's take a look here. What happens first?
Well, the king hurried down there to find out
Yeah.
whatever happened to Daniel.
You got it. So the king hurries down there with haste at the break of day to find out what happens to Daniel, right? Do we all remember being really being children and anticipating Christmas morning with all the gifts? And they wake up at the break of day because of the anticipation. We may remember some of our own children do it. They wake up at the break of day and they run downstairs just to see if Santa came. And there's that great anticipation. They can hardly sleep. And you just imagine that Darius is kind of like that with Daniel. He has this great anticipation. As soon as the first light of day comes up, he's gone. He's out the door, right? He's ready to see what's happened. And he goes there with great haste. You know, a king does not have to move with haste unless the king wants to. Everybody else has to wait on the king. Nothing can happen until the king comes. Right? So when the king is making great haste for something, there's a reason, especially with an issue like this, you know. So he's making great haste. He's anxious to see. As he comes near the den where Daniel was, what does he do?
Cries with a lamentable voice.
Cries out in a tone of anguish or with a lamentable voice, right? He's in anguish here. Now, how does this relate to what we've just said about the sealing of the stone? The king is on his way, right? It says that as he came near, so he's coming near, he's still drawing near. You can imagine servants are probably coming with him. They're going to be the ones breaking the seal. The king's not going to do that. They're also going to be the ones moving the stone. The king is not going to do that. Okay, it's going to be his servants who are doing that. And the king is crying out through the rock. He's so anxious to know. Right? "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Right? And there's that sense, there's that anticipation. This is how desirous he is to know. Okay? What happens next?
Well, we got an answer from Daniel right away, but
Yeah.
really,
He gets that answer from Daniel. Right? Has anybody ever misplaced a child? Right. And you know that sense of fear and anxiety, like, oh my god, just goes from the head to the toes and back up, and you start to cry out, you know, for the child's name. So and so, where are you? And then just that sense of relief as you finally hear, boom. You know, that little voice or that tiny voice shouting back at you. And you just have to have that idea here with the king. The king is shouting down to Daniel, and he's cupping his ear, right? He's got to hear through the stone, and he hears Daniel's response, right, coming through.
And his
You know,
response was
one of-
respectful.
Yeah.
O king, live forever.
Daniel's in a good mood, right? His response is respectful. "O king, live forever," right? You know, so that's tremendous. You got it. So, you know, then we have this interesting scenario. The wax is probably being torn away quickly, mined away. The rock is being pulled away from the den. The king commands Daniel to come up. Let's focus a little bit on Daniel's response, and we'll see some things here. Daniel chapter 6, verse 21 and 22. What are some things that we see in this response? He's respectful, which is great. What else?
He gives the credit to God.
Oh, of course, right? He gives the credit to God. And he says something specific. My God sent his angel. All right, where do we want to go with this? Because there's so many places we can go. Let's go here first. What does this say about God?
He's faithful.
Okay, God is faithful. Amen. Good. What else?
Compassionate.
He's compassionate. Good. What else?
Powerful.
He's powerful. Right? So not only are we learning that there's someone above Darius, but this someone is so high above Darius that he doesn't even have to do it himself. What's he do?
Sends the angel.
Sends a servant, right? Sends an angel to do it. That means that the angel is more powerful than who? The king Darius. The angel can do something that Darius cannot. He is more powerful than the king. And so what we are supposed to see here and what we're meant to see is the exaltation of God, the sovereignty of God. This is just how powerful he is. He sends a servant to do what the king of Persia cannot do himself. All right? We're supposed to see that. Let me take you somewhere else real quick, too, so that we see this point. Pop a bulletin or something in the book of Daniel, or keep your finger there. Head with me to Daniel chapter 12. Not Daniel chapter 12, I'm sorry, Revelation chapter 12. Revelation chapter 12. I need to go upstairs just for a moment, so I will be right back. But while I'm heading up, can somebody please read Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 12 for me? 7 through 12. Thank you.
And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. But he was not strong enough, and they lost their place in heaven. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil, or Satan, who leads the whole world astray. He was hurled to the earth, and his angels with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God, and the authority of his Christ. For the accuser of our brothers, who accuses them before our God day and night, has been hurled down. They overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They did not love their lives so much as to shrink from death. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and to the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury, because he knows that his time is short.
Again, we see that God's power is much greater than any of his creations. Lucifer and his angels were created. God had the power over them to cast them out. Through another servant.
Yeah, that's exactly the point, right? If you notice here in this particular war in Revelation chapter 12, God does not do a whole lot. Now war arose in heaven, Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. This is a scene where Michael and his armies defeat Satan and his armies. Now we know, of course, that God is empowering his side. But God here is actually not throwing down Satan. He's doing it through his servants. Right? If you can fight a war and have your servants win, God can just sit back and smile. Oh, you thought you were going to rival me, Satan? Well, here's another servant that I made, and that created being is going to beat you. Right? What happens when Jesus actually shows up? Let's take a look at that, because there is no real battle when Jesus shows up. Head with me to Revelation chapter 19. Revelation chapter 19, verses 11 through 16. Then I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. His eyes are like a flame of fire, and on his head are many diadems. He has a name written that no one knows but himself. He is clothed in a robe dipped in blood, and the name by which he is called is the Word of God. So who is this? Jesus. And the armies of heaven, arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, were following him on white horses. Now, I know we're Mennonites, but do we imagine anyone ever going to war dressed in white linen? Right? They're not doing any, if they were going to do fighting, they would have armor on. Plain and simple, right? They'd have swords. They'd have weapons. What are they dressed in? They're dressed in pajamas. Now, I'm being a little facetious there, of course, but the idea there is that they're just dressed in white clothes. The only one who has any color on him is the one with blood. That's Jesus, of course, right? His is dipped in blood. Verse 15. From his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God the Almighty. On his robe and his thigh he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So what's Jesus' weapon?
The word of his mouth.
The word of his mouth, right? There's a sword coming from his mouth. That's not literal. That's metaphor for he just speaks.
Same with creation, he just spoke it and happened.
You got it. Same with creation. It just happened. Then look here in verse 17 and on. You then see them, they're all trying to make war against him who sit on his throne. Let me just read the passage. Then I saw an angel standing in the sun, and with a loud voice he called to all the birds that fly directly overhead, Come gather for the great supper of God, to eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all men, both free and slave, both small and great. And I saw the beast and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who is sitting on the horse and against his army. The beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who in its presence had done the signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who worshipped its image. These two were thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. The rest were slain by the sword that came from the mouth of him who was sitting on the horse, and all the birds were gorged with their flesh. So who actually kills everybody else? Jesus. The army just sits. Right? So when this particular king strolls onto the battlefield, and you can just imagine the horse isn't having to sprint, isn't running. The horse is just strolling. He speaks and he wins. Right? What's the point? The point is the exaltation and sovereignty, the grandeur of God. Right? He is one of a kind. He's unique. He's magnificent. He wins as soon as he walks on the stage. Okay? So let's head back into Daniel, because we're getting this concept. God's power is way above all others. As we're turning back to Daniel, what questions or comments do you have for us?
It's just really a great line when the first thing Daniel says is, O King, live forever. It's not, I'm okay.
Yeah.
He wants to put the king at ease, really, and although Daniel is a faithful servant of God, he's not afraid or not too holy or whatever to offer the king some respect, and
Yeah.
as Nancy said, and he's maybe what is that? He's comfortable in his own skin. He doesn't
Yeah.
need to. No, I'm okay. that's not the first thing that he says. It's kind of a cool.
Sure. So Daniel's perspective is so stable in his own identity in God, but also so outward focused that the first thing he talks about is the king. O king, live forever, instead of talking about himself. Yeah, absolutely. So we've talked about the my God sent his angel. Let's go back between what's being said here about O king, live forever, and also the rest of verse 21. Because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king, I have done no harm. What's that mean, literally, and then what does that mean for us, or as a broader application for us?
Declaring that he was innocent and had no cause to be in the lion's den.
Yeah, so he's innocent before God, right? He's blameless in his relationship with God. He's done all that's necessary there, and he's highly favored of the Lord, right? The next line is interesting, though, because it's different. It's not that I was blameless before you, king. He did break the law. He says, I have done no harm. I have not injured you, king, by breaking this law, right? And what we find, John Goldengay says this, he says, loyalty to God and truth makes one loyal to the state in a better way than those just loyal to the state. One more time. Loyalty to God and the truth makes one loyal to the state in a better way than those just loyal to the state. The question is, why? Why would somebody who is loyal to God and the truth make a better servant to the state than someone who is just loyal to the state?
The truth has a lot of impact here, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Can you say some more there?
If you're honest and trustworthy, you're more valuable to the state than you would be
Okay.
not honest.
Yeah. So truth has a huge impact. Number one, truth in our actions, that we're trustworthy, and that we're able to be trusted by the state. Yeah. Good. What else? Let's hit on more on this truth bit.
Jesus is truth.
So Jesus is the truth, right? So we always, today we would say we'd be followers of Jesus. Absolutely.
I feel like Daniel has more to live for than just being a good government employee or whatever, good
Okay.
overseer of government. He's got God to live for, and so the other guys in the government, they're basically live to appease the king,
Yeah.
create some kind of good impression, and that's all they've got.
Sure.
It's for themselves.
Daniel
rather than-
Daniel has more than that.
Yeah. So Daniel has a greater motivation and more to live for than just the people who are loyal to the state. He is God, and he knows to keep his position there. He doesn't have to be in government, but he can be. Right? He can flux either way. But those who are just loyal to the state, then, have nothing else other than their position. That makes them what? More prone to jealousy, more prone to squabbles, more prone to manipulating good and trustworthy servants to death, right? And that's what this is. Envy, manipulating the king to get their way. This is what people in power with no accountability to God or loyalty to God do. Truth becomes subjective because it's all about my end goal. There's nothing else to live for, right? For Christians, or for people who serve God, in Daniel's context as people who serve God, for us today, it's Christians, we would stand on the truth just because it's the truth. because that's what's right and real to do. And in that way, we would, just like Daniel, defy laws that are wrong. Right? But we would also promote laws that are good. As in comparison to those who are just loyal to the state, they're just going to do whatever gains them more power. It's almost like this book of Daniel speaks right into our situation today in the American government. Huh. We could just think about that, right? How's the song go? Ancient words ever true. Right? That's what we find. The stuff that's happening today in America is just a rehashing and a repeat with some different clothes on of what has happened time and time again throughout history. Okay? It's some of the clothing is different, some of the trapping is different, but the basic problem is simply we don't worship Jesus as a whole in America any longer. That's the issue. Okay?
The verse in chapter 12 of Revelation, we just skipped over the
Okay?
verse 11, chapter 12,
Revelation chapter 12,
verse 11.
verse 11.
And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, and loved not their lives unto the death.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That applies very much for today.
You got it. And they conquered him, meaning the ancient serpent, the devil, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives, even unto death. And that's still something that we as Christians can grab a hold of and should grab a hold of. What does it mean to not love our lives, even unto death?
Be willing to give your life for Christ.
That means we're willing to lay down our life for Christ. Sometimes we might think it's easier to lay down our life as in immediately die for Christ, but it's something else when we're asked to lay down our position or our job or something else for Christ, and then have to live with the consequences. What does that mean when we do such a thing? If we have to lay down our job or lay down our profession or lay down our position for Christ, who are we trusting to provide? God, right? And just like Daniel, I'm going to grab a hold of this in Revelation 11 and pull us back to Daniel. Just like in Daniel, many times we are not preserved from the trial, but preserved in the trial. Daniel is not preserved from going into the lion's den. Neither are the three men preserved from going into the furnace, but they're preserved in the midst of that trial. Okay? I think that's good.
And like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, even if our God does not protect us, we will serve him.
Yeah, absolutely. And just like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, even if our God does not protect us, we will still serve him. Very good.
He promised he'd never leave us or forsake us. He would always be with us.
You got it. The Lord will never forsake us or be with us. That's from Hebrews. And you've got it. Questions, comments, different perspective.
Well, I think in our lives, lots of times, I know that right at the time, maybe you don't feel it, but after, when you look hindsight, you can see that where the Lord stepped in and helped you.
Yep. So in our own trials, many times it may not be that we are seeing a man that looks like the Son of God walking around with us in the fire. But when we're doing the post-game evaluation of the trial, we can then very readily see the hand of God with us in that. and go, wow, here's a provision, and here's a provision, here's a provision, here's where he was with me, and I remember this, this, and this. Yeah, absolutely.
We have strength that is beyond what we could do.
Yeah. And even through the trial, we have strength beyond what we can do. That's great. That's part of the provision of the Lord as we worship him. Good. One more point that's coming to me here just at the end, and I'm not sure why. If we remember the song, Come Thou Fount of Every Blessing, right? The second verse. Here I raise my Ebenezer. What's an Ebenezer?
Jesus.
Ebenezer is the memory stone that we grab onto. It's the stone that we plant and that we can then remember what is done for us. And that includes Jesus. But it's remembering how the Lord has delivered us. Why do you think it's important to remember in our lives how the Lord delivers us?
Strengthens us for the future.
Absolutely. It strengthens and builds our faith for the future. So that during the next trial, we're looking back and we go, I already know the Lord has provided for me. I know the Lord will provide for me going forward. Right? It builds that strength. Okay? It's one of the reasons why in the Old Testament many times you will hear, remember, remember, remember. Alrighty, I'm off the soapbox. Anything else?
The reason I said Jesus was because he is our rock, our foundation.
Yeah.
And out of the rock came the water to quench the thirst of the Israelites.
Sure, absolutely. Jesus is our rock. He's our Savior. And Paul will relate in 1 Corinthians that rock back into the book of Numbers, I believe, where the rock is the one from whom the water flows, right? And that water quenches our thirst. That dovetails back into Psalm 42, which we read earlier, as a deer panteth for water, right? Dovetails into John chapter 4, promise you a wellspring of water flowing up into what? Into everlasting life or eternal life, right? So we can weave all those thoughts together. Thank you so much. We'll see you upstairs. Blessings to you all.